I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. And the convention commences. Welcome to Perino on Politics. This is where I call my smart friends to find out what's on their minds about the state of American politics, and you get to listen in. And today is my very dear friend, and we are in person. It is Karl Rove. Thank you so much for being here.
Am I representing the not-so-smart friends that you have?
Nope, you're the smart friend. I just saved you for the best time, which is we're here in Milwaukee at the RNC convention.
Yes, we are.
So I want just a word for everybody listening or watching, however you take this in. By the time this posts, we will know who President Trump has chosen to be his vice presidential nominee for this cycle, for this election. So we don't know who it is. We could guess, but I don't want to waste your time on that because it's not like we haven't had some big news in the past 2 weeks. And the main two things I want to talk to you about in this first segment is about the assassination attempt on former President Trump, and then on Biden's response, but also the 2 weeks he had beforehand. And then in the second segment, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening down ballot. So let's start with that shocking news. Where were you when you heard that President Trump had been shot?
I was sitting in the Salt Lake airport in between flights from Santa Barbara to Salt Lake and then Salt Lake to Milwaukee. Then I was sitting with a group of California National Convention delegates and Utah National Convention delegates when I got the text and had to step away and immediately get on the phone and hear what was going on. There were no television screens in the airport tuned into news. They all were, sort of the
Golf.
No, not even that. They were there. Here are the services available in the Salt Lake City airport. But until I got word that he'd been picked up and taken to the vehicle and seemed to be on his own 2 feet, I worried about the worst. And then when I got aboard the plane, I was able to get to watch the news. And oh my God, a fraction of an inch, and the country would be plunged into a terrible moment, deeply terrible.
It's almost like impossible to imagine, and you don't even want to let your mind go there. I was brushing my teeth that night after we did the coverage, and I was looking in the mirror, and then I'd look off to the side, and then back to the mirror, and then back to the side, because I was like, that's how close it was to him losing his life, and also, that indelible image would have been horrendous. Thankfully. That did not happen. He said today in an interview that's posted in the New York Post that he was given a chance to unite the country and maybe even the world. And I've never had a brush with death. And I do wonder for this person who is a fascinating person, whether you like his politics or not, he is a fascinating person who does seem to have drawn upon this strength to know in that moment that he wanted to be everyone to see that he was okay. And that he was going to still fight. That was his instinct. And you see those amazing photographs from that day. Yeah.
It's hard to imagine what you feel in that kind of moment. We all have friends who were in combat, whether it was in Gulf War, Iraq War, Afghanistan. And I remember an uncle who fought in World War II and an uncle who fought in Vietnam, 7 tours of duty in Vietnam.
Wow.
And there's something about being shot at. Winston Churchill said there was something really special about being shot at. And it to become that close to death, to eternity, must have a profound effect. And I frankly thought that might be part of the reason that he was spared, because his instinct was, I have a mission, and the mission is to unite the country. I thought his message saying that, he loved his supporters and he loved all Americans and he wanted to unify the country was really powerful. Let's see how long that lasts, because if that's the message on Thursday night, that he realizes that we can have disagreements over policies and the direction of the country, but we're all part of a giant family called America, and that it's the job of the president to unite the country and to lead, not to give up his views, but to pursue his views with respect for the giant family of which he's the leader, then that could be a powerful moment and would seal the election, in my opinion.
Is it fair to say, you might not like this phrase, but right now with the election, is it Trump's to lose?
Well, I've said that in my column that he was in the catbird seat a couple weeks ago. That's because of the first debate. This is an election in which there are strong feelings about both candidates, but people are more enthusiastic about Trump than they're enthusiastic about Biden. In fact, the Biden supporters are driven more by an animosity towards Trump than they are about loyalty to or support of Biden's. But it was a close race, and it's going to remain a close race. Trump has been winning largely on two bases. One is that on big issues like the cost of living or the border or America's position in the world, that people feel that things were better when he was in than they think things are when Biden is in. And the other issue is that he was seen as a stronger leader.
Yeah.
And we tend to give the benefit of the doubt. I mean, you and I were in a campaign in 2004 where a lot of people had doubts about the Iraq war, but they saw Bush as a strong and effective leader and did not believe Kerry had deep, strong opinions. So they were willing to say, I'm for the guy that I may have some concerns about his policy, but I think he's a stronger, more effective leader. And on the first debate, we already had deep doubts about the mental acuity and physical stamina of an 81-year-old president. And that debate solidified and magnified those concerns, so that Trump has been winning on and decisively winning in the last 2 weeks on the issue of who's the stronger, more effective leader. And the image of him, literally trying to pull himself away from Secret Service protection in order to raise a fist and to reassure that he was there, that he was okay, that he was not gone, was a powerful moment that just simply reaffirmed that.
Do you think the Republican Party at this point is more united than the Democrats?
Yeah, because they've got the Republicans by and large have a candidate that, well, both parties, it's like, 90 some odd percent of the self-identified members of the Republican or Democratic Party support their nominees. It's just that the Republicans are supporting theirs with enthusiasm and the Democrats aren't. And that's going to affect turnout. If you've got a 48-48 election, but one side is really riled up and ready to vote, then that 48 is going to turn into 50 or 51 or 52, and that 48 is on the other side that's unenthusiastic is going to turn into 47, 46, 45.
Let's talk about Joe Biden for a moment. And before we talk about his political position, what do you think of his response and a decision to give a rare primetime Oval Office address? I will tell you, my opinion was that his address fell just short of what it needed to be in terms of meeting the moment, because I do think it would have been powerful for him to say, we need to unite. We need to be better. We have to have better rhetoric. We have to treat each other better. And that begins with me, right? As a leader to say, and that begins with me. Follow my lead. But he didn't do that. No.
In fact, remember, here's a guy who less than a week ago said to the Democratic fundraiser, we need to put a bullseye on Donald Trump.
Yeah.
But look, everybody on both sides is responsible for bringing us to this moment. And you're right. If he had said to assume responsibility and said it's up to me. And look, but also it was the delivery. I mean, he was reading it off of a single teleprompter in front of him on the other side of the room, which is fine, but there was no emotion. It was like, it's a dead giveaway when he drops his voice.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen.
It's fake.
It's like, and so he just looks old, and he is old.
And when and look, I can be somebody. The other day on the 5, I didn't even remember my own name when I was about to introduce the 5. I flubbed my own name, but when he constantly does things like, we'll fight this out at the battle box. And then he repeated it. We will fight this out at the battle box. I'm like, no, we will battle it out at the ballot box. And for presidents, they have to be able to communicate effectively in order to persuade. And I feel like Biden has lost that. But this Saturday's failed assassination attempt put a little bit of a circuit breaker on the calls for within the Democratic Party for him to drop out. Does that continue? I'm of a rare breed. I think it makes it more likely he gets replaced.
Well, I may be with you on that because look, I think the Saturday's event and the arrival of the Republican convention, you don't, if you're a Democrat leader, you don't want to add to the view that your party is dispirited after, and in conflict with itself, while the other party is looking united, which we tend to look like in conventions. But the 2 weeks was starting this Friday. I think we're going to see a return to concern and demand for him to step aside.
For Biden to step aside.
Yeah.
Do you think that because the polls will show, remember in his press conference, he said, if the polls show that I'm down that much, like he would consider stepping aside?
Well, the polls have already started to show it. Now, granted, this is an election that's sort of like World War I, where it's, you measure your advances and retreats in yards, not miles. But if you look at it in the Real Clear Politics and 538 averages, there's been a persistent upward. Let me put it this way: the gap between the two men is widening to the disadvantage of Biden advantage of Trump. It's not that Trump is moving up dramatically. He's moved up a little, but it's that Biden has dropped. And if you look inside the latest Fox poll numbers that were issued on Sunday, put aside the head-to-head, which showed movement towards Trump. If you look inside, the percentage of people who believe that Joe Biden lacks the physical stamina and mental acuity to be president, they have three questions that ask that, and on all three, there's significant upward movement for the people who say he's not up to it.
The Trump campaign put out a memo. I can't remember if it was on background or on the record, but I just know that you've talked about this as well, that we have several battleground states in America. We're in one. We're in Wisconsin. Yeah. This might be the most battlegroundy of the battlegrounds.
Yeah, it was in 2020 and 2016. It was the state that flipped it from one candidate to the other.
So, but
tipping point state, we call that.
Oh, a tipping point state. That's good to know. And there's a little inside tip for my listeners here. Do you believe that Georgia, North Carolina, and Nevada are off the table for Biden?
I do.
Okay. So then Biden's path to 270 is very perilous.
Yeah. Yeah, Arizona, the numbers look like it belongs in the North Carolina, Georgia, and Nevada group, but there's just a disquietude in Arizona about it. But let's assume for a minute that Trump carries all four of those states. Then all he's got to do is carry one of the Great Lakes states, and in order to win, Biden has to carry all three: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Right. So that's where we are on that.
Yeah. Well, we may also there may be additions because we don't have a lot of polls in Minnesota, New Mexico, New Hampshire, Virginia, but 3 or 4 of those states could be in play. If the bottom begins to fall out on Biden for a variety of reasons. New Mexico because of energy. Remember, that state's the budget of the state of New Mexico is dependent upon the oil and gas industry, and it's a border state.
Yeah.
And then Virginia, which has a very popular Republican governor. Minnesota, which is an upper Midwestern state and is also a plain state. So it's partly like Wisconsin battleground, but it's also parts of it are like North and South Dakota, big red.
Mm-hmm.
And then New Hampshire, which is last carried by the Republicans in 2000, but it's got a Republican governor and is a tip-eaten state.
That must have been a hard one for you to swallow in 2004.
Oh, yes, it was. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. But we did flip Iowa and New Mexico.
Right. Will Democratic fundraising for the Biden-Harris campaign continue to slow down to a trickle or even stop?
Well, I think it'll slow down. I'm not certain it will stop because, they're sort of why sometimes, particularly small dollar donors, big dollar donors will say, I'm done. But small dollar donors will say, you know what, by God, if we're going to go down, I'm going to send another $15, that kind of thing. But no, and look, money is important. And they have because that allows you to begin a ground game, and they have a ground game. And in a close state like Michigan or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, which today are 1 or 2 points, a strong ground game can buy you 1 or 2 points for 3 or 4 points at most. But that advantage is probably going away.
All right. We are live from Milwaukee, and we'll have more Perino on Politics coming up. And we're back with Perino on Politics live from Milwaukee. Karl, I want to talk about the down ballot races. By the down ballot, we mean the House, Senate, and even gubernatorial races across the country. Looks like right now, I think that some of the Democrats, one of the reasons they would think about switching out Biden is they think, wow, we could possibly lose the White House and forfeit the Senate to the Republicans and turn the House Republicans' fortunes around. Yeah. So House, Senate, and possibly some more gubernatorial races?
Yeah, well, senators, let's start there. The Democrats are going to lose the Senate. I mean, the map is so bad for them. And, West Virginia, I defy people to tell me who the Democratic candidate is.
I have no idea.
And so if we hold Texas and Florida, which, emergency alert here, we're going to hold Texas and Florida, means that with West Virginia, we're at 51. Actually, we're at 50. And then we got Montana and Ohio, which were states carried by Trump, 16 points and 8 points, I believe, respectively. And we should carry one or both of those. And then we've got good candidates in Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. And of those 5 states, we should carry a couple. And on a good day, more than a couple. We got a problematic race in Arizona. where our candidate will be selected here August 3rd. But we're not doing well on the polls out there. But, it's the Republicans are going to take the Senate, and the bigger the margin they have in the Senate, the more likely they are to hold the Senate for the balance of the decade.
And boy, if President Trump were to win the presidency, that's so important on the Senate side, so you can confirm your appointees very quickly.
Right. And judges. And we might have one or two retirements on the Supreme Court. One Democrat appointed judges in ill health. So, who knows? In the House, 6 months ago, I would have said that the Republicans were going to lose the House and deserve to because they were a train wreck. But Speaker Johnson has performed admirably. I think he has restored the dignity of the House. He's restored order, by and large, to the Republican caucus, even though we have a couple of, sort of loudmouths and lunatics who create problems. But I think the Republicans now stand a pretty good chance of, if you take a look at, for example, if Republicans take their 22 toss-up seats, 11 Democrat and 11 Republican, and if the Republicans take the 11 Republican seats and don't convert any of the Democrats, they're in the majority.
Right.
So I think there's a good chance. And they got to be careful. We can't look like we're overreaching. This was the problem that cost us seats in the 1998 midterm election. And, in presidential election, we should, particularly if we're winning at the top of the ticket, we'll pick up seats in places like North Carolina and Ohio. It's going to come down, though, ironically enough, to what we call orphan seats. Those are seats that are in a state that is not going to be a presidential battleground. And in this election, it's going to be California and New York, where the Republicans took control of the House last time because we won seats in New York. And so holding on to those 5 seats, or 4 seats now, and then holding on in California, maybe even picking up one with the seat around Stockton where the very popular mayor of Stockton, Lincoln, is running.
I remember when we went to Stockton, California to stump for Pombo. Remember Congressman Pombo?
I sure do.
What's he up to?
He's not in Congress anymore.
No, that's true.
I think we helped him stay in that time. That was one of the more fun fundraisers because, as you may recall, the chairman of the fundraising event was this wonderful character named Alex Spanos.
Yes.
Alex was the classic American story. Poor immigrant family, and through dint of hard work, rises up to build a very big business, ultimately buys the San Diego Chargers, now run by his son. But Alex Spanos had more personality than half a dozen people combined. And as he was taking the President of the United States, it was in this gigantic old theater that had been renovated, and there were hundreds of people jammed together at tables on the floor of the theater. And Alex insisted on taking the President of the United States from table to table to enter, and he knew everybody. And, here's the auto, Marie and Tom, they're the auto dealers. They sell Toyotas. And here's, he's an almond farmer, and she's the chairman of this. And he had so much fun. And President Bush was being taken around, being introduced to all these people. And Pombo is in the back hall. I'm back in the staff room, and Pombo is there,
waiting,
and not going out to see his constituents. But Alex Spanos would have been elected king of Stockton had he ever run for that.
One of the great things about a convention is the list of speakers, and there's going to be a lot of politicians that speak this week, yes, and I think that's interesting. But I personally absolutely love the real people that you get to meet.
Yeah.
And I don't have a list of those here, but I do know that President Trump invited the frat boys from University of North Carolina who helped protect the flag from the pro-Hamas protesters.
Yes.
And I thought, that's genius.
That's genius. Let's figure out who did that and compliment them. They get an A on their report card. Yeah, it's a lot of fun to listen to. Sometimes the most memorable people to speak at a convention are people like that.
Yeah.
You may remember at the 2012 convention, it was not in prime time, so not enough people saw it, but the elderly couple from Middlebury, Vermont, who stood up and talked about Mitt Romney they went to church, the same church, and when their teenage son was stricken with cancer, they talked about how Mitt Romney visited their son in the hospital to minister to him and to be his friend. And then when the end was coming, their son was worried about what would happen to his prized possessions, and he asked Mitt if he would help make a will. And the next time that Mitt came to see him, he brought a yellow pad, and together they made out the will so that his treasured items would go to his brother. And then he passed, and The mother said, Mitt gave the eulogy, and it was a beautiful eulogy. And how could you not look at a man who would care so deeply about a dying 14-year-old boy and understand he would care deeply about each and every American? And I remember I'm sitting there on set for Fox with Bill O'Reilly, and I looked across the table, and Bill O'Reilly was crying.
Yeah.
And nobody knew.
That
who
didn't
those
happen
people were.
often.
Yeah, it doesn't happen often.
One of the speakers that will be here is the family of Rachel Morin. She was a young mother who was raped and murdered by an illegal immigrant.
Yeah.
Who, so her family is going to be here.
Yeah.
And
powerful.
It will be powerful.
Yeah.
And this is it's happening way too much. So there will be celebrations. It will be very interesting to see President Trump address the crowd. I think that you'll probably see him on the Monday night, maybe just to see like a hello.
Yeah.
But that anticipation that he knows how to build because people want to hear from him.
Yeah.
That
he
might
may be the
a
former
couple
president, but first and foremost, he's the executive producer of The Apprentice.
That's
So
indeed.
he's thinking about how to maximize this.
All right, Karl, we'll be right back with more Perino on Politics. And we're back with the last segment of Perino on Politics. And so at this point in the podcast and at this point in the election cycle, what I would like to ask you is, what could I be missing that you pay attention to starting now at the convention and onward until Election Day?
Well, this is sort of hard to follow, but it's fun to follow. What is each camp doing in order to do the mechanical things necessary to maximize their turnout? What is each campaign doing? What are the groups that they're focused on where their talents and efforts are aimed at persuading people who are either up for grabs or weakly linked to the other side and bring them over? Because elections are about addition. And there are two ways to go about getting additions. And you need to do both. You need to maximize the turnout among what we call your base. But that's insufficient. The base of used to be the Democratic base was big enough that all you had to do in the 70s and 60s was
turn out your base.
Turn out your base. But we're now at a point where each party's base is insufficient to win the election. But maximizing that turnout is important. And then second of all, though, you got to pick out the people who are up for grabs. People are sitting there saying either I'm undecided, which those people tend to make their decisions late. They consume less information. They're really not paying attention much. There are things that sort of stroke them into politics, but much of it is sort of forces them out. And then there are people who really are, and particularly in this election, have anxieties about their choices. People have taken to calling them double haters because they don't like either one of them. But I don't think that's a good title.
I don't either. I call them double dismayed.
Or double disappointed.
Double disappointed, yeah.
Absolutely. Either way, because what they're looking...
They don't hate people. They're like, oh,
really?
Is this really the two that we're... Yeah.
Yeah.
But do you think some of them might say with President Trump, if he can hold on to this unity message and he's the fighter, like that he will bring along some of those people who are on the fence?
They know he's a fighter. They know he's strong. What they want to see is compassion. They want to hear him say things like he said this morning. And, we're all in this together. We as a country must be unified because we're going to rise or fall. We can have our disagreements, but we're going to rise or fall as a country together. And I want our future to be more prosperous and more hopeful for every single American. And I'm going to pursue policies that I believe will do that, like securing our border and keeping taxes low and encouraging economic growth and making our military strong and providing order and law in our cities. All of these things will be enormously powerful in solidifying the double doubters.
Is the get out the vote movement within a campaign, it might not be the most fun part, right? Like the mechanics, but in this election, I think a lot of people, especially Republicans, are going to pay attention to what are the rules for early voting and drop boxes. And already Wisconsin, here in this state, right? The state Supreme Court just ruled something. I can't remember which way it was, but it sounded like it would benefit Democrats if you look at it that way. Pennsylvania's got problems. I mean, how much are you paying attention to that?
Paying a lot. And like the Wisconsin decision, I think you referenced a decision by the Election Commission that set up guidelines under, you're allowed to have drop-off boxes in Wisconsin under statute. And so they set a group of guidelines. Think about this, though. Those guidelines help the Democrats in places like Milwaukee. They help the Republicans in places like Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington. Then the rural part of the state. Look, In Florida and Texas, both those states have very expansive early voting laws. Half the vote in Texas is cast early, either in person or by mail-in ballots for anybody who's over 65 or anybody who has disabilities that don't allow them to get to the voting place. We even allow in Texas voting from your car if you're
I know.
mobile.
I remember that in Houston.
Yeah. Well, he was carrying it too far and got slapped down.
Yeah. I got in trouble.
The law is explicit. You have to be immobile.
You can't just like drive by and go, on, and then like keep going.
Yeah. Well, and we don't want that.
No.
Think about that. I've got my landscape crew. Boys, we're all going to go down and get in my pickup truck, and I'm the boss, and we're going to go vote.
And you're going to vote, aren't you?
And you're going to be sitting in the car with me, and I'm going to know exactly how you vote. So that's why the court slapped it down. But my point is this. Florida and Texas. Florida, they win the early vote. In Texas, we split the early vote. So it's mechanical.
Yeah.
I'll give you one other example. And this is I'm involved in a voter registration effort in Texas. The last 3 election cycles, we've been running this effort underneath the radar. Every month, we total up the new number of people that we've registered. As of the end of last month, in the last 3 election cycles, we have registered 493,000 new Republicans in Texas, including 15,000 last month.
Wow.
And so think about that. If you're in a growing state like us and you're getting these people onto the rolls, but
Are those new residents? Because you have a lot of new residents in Texas.
Yeah, lots of new people. Our population is going to double between 2020 and 2050. Our population is going to double, and what we're doing is methodically identifying and work. Somebody moved here from California. Oh, they were a registered Republican in California. Oh, they moved from here, Ohio. They voted in the Republican primary in Ohio.
Let's go get them.
And go get them. And as a result, what happened is 2018 we came close to losing races. And in 2020 and 2022, we've been growing our margins by engaging in the blocking and tackling of getting people onto the rolls and turning them over to candidates, saying, here's somebody newly registered on the rolls, fork them. We follow them in the fall election. They vote at a higher rate than the rest of the population because what happens is the candidates say, give me that person. And I'm going to put Senator Cornyn in 2020, Governor Abbott in 2022 made a special efforts to reach out to those people, educate them, persuade them, and motivate them.
I always ask one last question for the dismount. So I ask on social media. Today, Karl Rove will be my guest. What would you ask him? Here's a blast from the past. Jenny Korn. She wants to know, does he think Trump will surpass the 44% Hispanic vote that Bush earned in 2004?
I don't know. And remember, this is an artificial thing because there's not just an Hispanic vote. There are Hispanics votes. Mm-hmm. You know, there are different Hispanic communities. You've got the Central Americans, you got the South Americans, you got the Cuban Americans, you got Mexican Americans, you got the Mexican Americans in Texas who, by and large, a big chunk of them came here after the revolution in Mexico in 1912 and were the Mexican middle class. Mm-hmm. And then there are California, which are more recent immigrants. So, but yeah, I think he's going to do well. I'm not certain he'll get to the 44, but he'll do well.
Because Bush got to 44,
right.
McCain collapsed.
Yes.
Right? Into the 20s?
I think it was the mid to high 20s.
High 20s,
yeah,
right. And then Mitt Romney didn't really recover.
Yeah, no.
And so that was a place for room to grow. But also it's interesting because, as you say, there's many different types of Hispanics.
Right.
And also multi-generational.
Right.
So now they're like, well, I'm just American.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like I've got a nephew, Kevin Patrick Hickson. He's Hispanic. His mother was Mexican American,
right?
And so you're considered Latino by maternal descent. But you know, he was an intern for Senator Cornyn, and is a small business guy in Houston, and married to a college professor and a young family. And
love it.
But he's a Republican.
Love it, Karl. I love you. Thanks for being here.
I love you too, Dana.
Okay.
In an entirely appropriate fashion. If Peter is listening.
Yes. Peter, if you're listening. All right. Thank you. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.